Reading with your kids.
Hola, ni hao, konnichiwa, assalamu alaikum, shalom, mahaba, moni moli wanji, namaste, jumbo, bienvenidos. Hi, my name is Jed Lee, and this is the Reading with Your Kids podcast. We are coming to you from the beautiful neighborhood of Reedville in the southwest corner of Boston, Massachusetts. We are so delighted and so very honored that you join us in our mission to help families grow closer through reading. Please be sure to tell all of your family and friends about the Reading with Your Kids podcast. And if you could, please subscribe to the show in the iHeartRadio app on Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, Spotify, Goodbods, Podbean, Stitcher Radio, wherever you find your podcast. Our guest today is Abigail Gimpel. She is here to celebrate her parenting book. It's called HyperHealing. Before we invite Abigail into the studio, we want to let you know that this episode of the Reading with Your Kids podcast is brought to you by The Adventures of Harry and Friends, a delightful picture book series by our friend Sarah Belisa Tucker. Does your child take responsibility for their mistakes? Do they blame others or lie? What Should I Do? Helps parents like you teach their children to make better choices. You can get your copy of What Should I Do? Or the entire 7-book Adventure of Harry and Friends series at Amazon or BarnesandNoble.com. This episode of the podcast is also brought to you by The Sound of Words by Anita Landau. Anita wrote this book to help individuals learn how to use their senses to make sense of reading, spelling, and writing English words. As we've covered here in the podcast, English doesn't always make sense, but The Sound of Words can really help. The Sound of Words empowers emerging readers to learn to mark the letters and words and to find sound spellings. The book is organized into vowel sound patterns with the vowels in the order they are found in the alphabet. This can be a real life-changing book. Check it out today. The Sound of Words by Anita Landau. Join us right now from the beautiful nation of Israel. Our guest is here today to celebrate a wonderful book for parents. It's called HyperHealing. Please welcome to the show, Abigail Gimpel. Hey, Abigail, how are you?
I'm great. Thank you so much for having me.
I'm excited to have you on. HyperHealing deals with the issue of ADHD. Something that many families are dealing with today.
That's right. Yeah, it's definitely, I don't bump into almost anybody when I mention that I deal with ADHD. Say, oh, I have a brother, I have a son, I have a daughter, my cousin. That it comes that everyone's dealing with it.
Yeah. So just for the 1 in a million persons who may be listening to this who aren't familiar with the term and what it is, just please explain real quickly what ADHD is for that person.
Sure. So the ADHD stands for Attention Deficit Hyperactivity Disorder. And we used to have another subset that was called ADD, which was without the hyperactivity. Now that's no longer part of our diagnostic manual. So therefore, we're only the ADHD. And what that is essentially a descriptive behavioral condition where kids or adults will have trouble with focusing, concentrating, sitting for a long period of time, completing tasks. They have trouble with social and emotional outbursts and have a hard time often making friends. Transitions are usually very, very challenging for them. They tend to have less good habits than their peers. Mm-hmm. And there are a lot of different things that are added on to the ADHD diagnosis. But again, it's a diagnosis of descriptive, observable symptoms.
Interesting that we no longer use the ADD diagnosis. Is there a reason for that?
It's really hard to follow. This is the decision that was made by the American Psychiatric Association, and in their diagnostic manual, the 5th edition, they decided to simplify, I guess, and they call it ADHD with different subsets. Mm. So you would have, instead of being ADD, you would be ADHD inattentive. So it's just a kind of playing around with words, and they felt that would be more simple for people to understand.
Now, I've had an interesting journey with ADHD. I am probably somebody who struggles with, as I like to say, a little extra energy at times. My son certainly did. But the first time I heard the term was over 30 years ago. I was running an after-school program, and we had a student who was very challenging, and his behavior was oftentimes violent and very uncooperative. And I remember his mom brought his psychologist in, and it was explaining, you have to give the kid a break. He has this thing, ADHD. And I said, well, what is this? I've never heard of it. And he gave me the description as you did. And my first reaction was, you just described 99% of the boys that I grew up with. That doesn't seem to be
Right.
like a problem.
Exactly. So it is a problematic diagnosis. And actually, medicating for ADHD really didn't take off till the early 80s, because even though the diagnosis with other names has been around for a very long time, because parents were looking at the diagnosis, reading the list and saying, well, this looks like childhood to me. Mm-hmm. So it's a little bit more exaggerated, perhaps childhood, but yeah, it's kind of like the kids we all grew up with. The distinction that they make is that everyone will be impulsive sometimes. We all have some ADHD kind of symptoms, and we might have more ADHD when we're tired or we're hungry or we're agitated, but it has to get in the way of a person's performance. That means they're failing out of school, they're isolated, they're constantly making social faux pas, they're not managing to make friends and hold down jobs. And then they say, oh, okay, so now it's a disorder. So it's a very fine line, and it's like I said, problematic, because we are describing normal behaviors, and then we're saying those normal behaviors are caused by some kind of brain abnormality. So that leap is challenging and might not necessarily be accurate.
Interesting. You mentioned that we're medicating this. Talk a little bit about how we're medicating kids who are diagnosed with ADHD.
So we're mainly using stimulant medication, and when stimulants don't work, that would be like Ritalin, Adderall kind of thing. If that, or Concerta, if that doesn't work, then they use different types of drugs that work on different neurotransmitters. But the drug of choice is going to be a stimulant, and Ritalin is still top of the pile. And they kind of explain that it has this what's the word? Okay, I'm forgetting the word, but it's kind of like an opposite effect, where as a stimulant should make us more energetic. For kids with ADHD, it makes them calmer. And people actually used to use drugs in order to diagnose and say, oh, if it works for me, then it must be working on my brain neurotransmitters, and therefore I must have ADHD. Now, we know that over 50% of college students in America are using Ritalin just so that they can party hard and then study hard. And it gives them tons of energy to keep going. So it doesn't calm you down. It hyper-focuses you. And therefore, it's not surprising that it works, and it works on all brains. So this is not very diagnostic at all. 80% of us respond the same way to Ritalin. As a matter of fact, when I tried it one day just to see what was going on with this drug, what does it do? That was the very day that I got dinner on the table by 5 o'clock in the afternoon. I was literally catching dust. I was working so quickly and so efficiently. And I'm certainly not someone that struggles with ADHD symptoms. So it's effective for all of us. Not that I recommend that we all take it, but and there's an interesting thing that happens with people that are struggling with the effects of ADHD symptoms, where they'll take Ritalin and they'll say, oh my God, this is what my brain is supposed to work like. And I say, no one's brain is supposed to work this way. This hyper-focus is not natural for anybody, because they're saying, well, all my life, this is all I wanted to feel like. And we all kind of want to feel the way we feel under the influence of Ritalin. But, it's definitely the treatment of choice, which is why I sat down and wrote this book. And I've been working with ADHD for so many years. because although it's a good tool in our tool shed of ADHD treatment, and in some cases it's necessary, I would say it's probably our last tool of choice. Because in most cases, a person is missing skills or is dealing with something else that's an environmental cause. And if a person's ADHD is caused by something environmental, then shutting down the child or getting the child to be calmer is going to be very counterproductive because the child's acting out to get our attention. Mm-hmm. And we're saying, no, I don't like the way you're acting out. I need to get you to calm down and focus more. So that could actually be quite detrimental. So we really have to take a journey to figure out what's causing the symptoms to begin with and what's missing for the child instead of bandaging it over with something that in the moment really does make the child do better, but long term could be not as productive as we'd hope. Yeah. It's usually disappointing in the end.
It's interesting. This is an issue that is, near and dear to my heart. And I'll share a little bit of our story. My wife has recently retired as a special needs teacher. She was a special needs teacher for 34 years here in Boston. And she certainly has had a number of children who were diagnosed with ADHD, and certainly medication helped them become more manageable in the classroom. So from a teacher's point of view, it's like a gift. It's like, whoa, yes, suddenly this child who was wreaking havoc in my classroom is calmer right now. But as I think that you were saying, it may not be the best choice for the child.
Right.
My son in middle school, an interesting journey. He was attending one school in the city, and this was a school that he had been at since kindergarten. And everybody in the school knew him. They knew he had a lot of energy, was impulsive, but it was Chris, and they knew him, and that was okay. When he was in 7th grade, he transferred to another school that wasn't in the city. It was in the suburbs. It was a bit more, I think of the term, but they didn't know him. And so his extra energy was seen as disruptive. And so immediately people were asking me, you should get him on some kind of medication. I'm like, no, I don't think so. And we really resisted it until the people at the school said that he wasn't making friends. And even though my son was coming home saying, yeah, I got lots of friends. I love this guy, this guy, this guy. His teachers are reporting, no, he's isolated. He's sad. And we went to the doctor, and the doctor just, kind of listened and goes, yeah, it's checking these boxes. So we're going to try this. And we gave us a medication. We tried it, once. And thankfully it was on the weekend. And thankfully both my wife and I were there. He took the medication, and within less than 20 minutes, he was in a pretty violent rage, and he was trashing his room, and to the point where I had to restrain him. We brought him to the emergency room, and the emergency room doctor said, "Yep, this is a possible side effect of this drug." And then his response was, "So we just have to try a different medication." And my response was, "Oh, I'm sorry, doctor, your mistake. We're not going to be trying any more medication." And so there's so much that you said, that whole idea of we had another doctor say to us, well, your son obviously doesn't have ADHD because the medication didn't help him.
Right.
And if he had it, then it would have helped, but it didn't help. He had that reaction, so that means he doesn't. And my whole thinking was, I'm not a doctor, but man, he sounds like he doesn't know what he's talking about.
Yeah, so he doesn't. And that's something, but this was a while back, and this is something that I think most doctors by now really know, that Ritalin really 80% respond in a much calmer, more hyper-focused way, and that there's the other 20%. Your son, Chris, seems to fall into that 20% that responds the opposite. So he had a manic episode, essentially, that was chemically induced. Very often, you're very lucky here, because I have clients who had the exact same experience where they were given Ritalin. They had a manic episode. They couldn't sleep for 24 hours. And then they were diagnosed with bipolar disorder. And they were told that the Ritalin had just brought it out in them and that it was just laying dormant instead of seeing the obvious, which is this is a side effect, is a possible side effect. And this one person I know was then on medication for bipolar disorder for years. And I said, well, why don't they just take her off of the Ritalin? And finally, we managed to pull that back. And she's a perfectly healthy person who needed to learn organizational skills and also to deal with some serious trauma she went through as a child. So they were just medicating, adding layer upon layer, and essentially giving one medication to counteract the side effects of another medication. Our brains are not meant to handle that much assault.
So, HyperHealing, you're offering parents a different way to look at ADHD and to manage it?
So what I'm saying in HyperHealing, and my real thesis is that when a child is checks the boxes, like your son did, of all these ADHD symptoms, what it's saying is the child is struggling. And it's much less important to me to know what diagnostic name we're pulling out of the DSM-5. But what I really want to know is why the child is struggling. So ADHD is a list of symptoms, and it's hard symptoms, and it's real symptoms. But just like when we would take a kid to the doctor, and the kid is suffering with a pain in his throat, and you go to the doctor, and the doctor would say, after asking 6 questions, the doctor would say, oh, okay, it's strep throat. So wouldn't you want to get a second opinion there, or say, doc, why don't you actually take a swab and see what's going on in there? So because pain in your throat could be coming from many different causes. It could be that you've been yelling all night, or that you're sleep deprived, or that you have COVID, or that it's strep, or that it's viral. There's so many reasons why your throat would be hurting, or you're having emotional distress and it's exhibiting itself in your throat. So therefore, ADHD is just the same way. It's symptoms that we're observing. And therefore, we really need to understand why the child is struggling. One reason for the struggles would be something hereditary, and it sounds like you have excess energy and your son does as well, and that excess energy could be used in the most blessed ways possible. Lord knows my husband's got excess energy, and I've never seen someone do as much as he does. It's really quite remarkable. As a matter of fact, I once said to him at about 11:30 at night, I'm really tired. And he looks at me and says, maybe your iron is low. This is what I'm dealing with. But the point is that it could be that, and I call that instant gratification personality, which is a person who wants everything fast and here and now and fun and dangerous and all that stuff, which is why they're never developing proper habits, because habits, we develop them when we repeat the same behaviors over and over again. That's boring. That's the opposite of their personality. So these people could grow up to be inventors and they can be in high tech like my husband is, or in alternative energy. That's his high tech style. But they can be in things that are really cutting edge. They do need to develop some habits, like serious habits. They're terrible with routines. They forget everything. And what I call is shedding. They're always, they're holding something. They put it down. Why? Because something else got interesting. So they walk away from what they were holding and lose it. And they're always frustrated. So there definitely is help needed there to get them to a place where they feel satisfied with their lives and they're effective in their own lives. But that's something that is training. You have to help the person train themselves emotionally and behaviorally, and then they do great. And as long as they want to put in the work, they're going to get there. And that's why a lot of people grow out of this kind of ADHD, because they develop habits throughout their elementary school, high school, college career. I know a lot of people who failed and fell on their face throughout high school, but suddenly in college they were chosen as valedictorian because they finally started developing these important habits. And getting help for that is really important. But those same exact symptoms could be exhibited screen addiction, or because of a physiological problem like a gut dysbiosis, someone who has some kind of physiological disorder like autoimmunity, asthma, allergies, things like that are going to also cause ADHD symptoms. Trauma, stress, not being exposed to nature, and not getting enough exercise. All of those things could easily be causing ADHD symptoms, which is why we have to slow down, not rush to diagnose and medicate, and we have to just ask why. So my book offers all of the whys, and besides for that, it also provides an intervention program for each of them. So a parent could go through it, and it's a handheld coach.
Mm-hmm.
And this way they can really get all the answers. This is something I was looking for as a young mother when I was thrown a prescription for my oldest child. And I'm looking at it, I'm saying, I thought prescriptions are only for sick people.
Mm-hmm.
She doesn't look sick to me. And that's when, everything started kind of rolling in my head, and I started asking a million billion questions. And that's how the journey really began. And I want to give that to every parent so that they don't have to be confused and not have the answers and research for 15 years and for more kids being diagnosed until they get the answers that they need.
It's really important. You hit on so many different areas. Parents are out there, and we rely on the people who are, quote unquote, the experts. So our teachers. And what a lot of parents don't realize is that teachers are overworked. They might have 20, 25 kids in their classroom, or if it's a special needs class, there may be 10 to 12 kids in that class. And their primary job is to keep the kids safe and keep the kids under control. And they don't necessarily have all that time to sit down and really figure out what it is that Chris or Johnny or Alice needs to develop these different habits. And then we trust our doctors who, after the teachers are frustrated and say, oh, you need to see your doctor, and the doctor sits down and, like you said, asks 6 questions, and within 10 minutes comes up with a diagnosis that, okay, your kid has this, and we're going to give your kid this very, very powerful psychotropic drug that changes a kid's brain chemistry. And parents haven't had the confidence to start asking deeper questions. And I think that that's wonderful that you've written a book that can give parents a little bit more of that confidence and give them some of the questions that they might want to ask to challenge those quote-unquote experts that are telling us our kids need to be medicated.
Right. And a sentence that I repeat often, because I say it to myself as well as to all the parents I meet, is we are really our child's only advocate. Mm-hmm. The doctors are caring, the teachers are caring. They want the best for our child, but they also want the best for their practice and the best for their classroom. And they're so limited. I'm a teacher myself. And I know that when I had 27 students in the classroom and 2 of them were clowning around, it definitely added a lot of challenge to my classroom. But I also knew that my job was to educate each kid. Mm-hmm. And I could not abandon that kid, nor could I shut the kid down because it was disturbing the greater classroom. And that was something that I was absolutely against. And when I was a young teacher and kids were still getting 2 doses of Ritalin, they got the 4 hours and then they went to the school nurse and got another 4 hours. I said to the school nurse, please do me a favor. Let the kid eat lunch and be alert and himself for the rest of the afternoon. Don't give the second dose. And then with that, my students forced me to be creative and to make a program for them. Mm-hmm. And that's something that I teach today to my adult students because I teach teachers today. I'm still working with the program I developed because of my students, because they gave me the gift of a challenge and they allowed me to develop something as for them, but as much for them as it was for me.
That's wonderful. Now, I can't speak directly to your program or the book, but I can say that my son had a very wonderful result. We dealt with his extra energy by changing his diet, changing the way he ate, doing something as simple as we had a meeting where we observed my son very, very attentive. And then at around 11:30 in the morning in this meeting, he lost it and lost all his energy. He slumped in the chair, couldn't focus on anything. And something inside me said, ask him if he's hungry. And he said, yeah, I'm really wicked hungry. And and at that time, the nutritionist and I said, maybe. And so I suggested to my son, maybe you eat some protein in the morning instead of cereal. That takes a little bit longer to digest. And his response was, I can eat a meatball for breakfast. And I'm like, sure, dude.
Cute.
And it made a huge difference. And then we tried exercises and became very successful and is a very happy and successful and talented young man today of 29 years old. And so I know we were able to find alternatives to medication for my son. There are lots of alternatives out there, and I'm so happy that HyperHealing, your book, is available for parents too.
Thank you so much. And I do begin, and first of all, well done to you, that you really were your child's advocate and you helped him find his strength and you paid attention. Mm-hmm. That's all I'm asking. Pay attention, and you noticed that slump and you were able to say, maybe it has something to do with diet. That's fabulous. And every child should be lucky enough to have a dad like you. And, but what I do say is we all deserve to take that journey. And I spend the first 3 chapters of the book speaking directly to the parent, because a lot of times our kids are clashing with us. Mm-hmm. And it makes us so crazy that our worst instincts come out. And then we get angry at ourselves. And we yell at our children, and that's kind of like our junk food, because like we need to just get it out of our system. And then we feel terrible for the rest of the day, just like we do when we eat junk food. So I first address the parents and say, you have a really hard job ahead of you. It's the best job you're ever going to have, but it's really hard. Take care of yourself first. Figure out what's bothering you. Why is your kid managing to trigger you so much? And figure out those behavior loops that he's feeding into you and you're feeding him. And then you're both tantruming together. And you're not looking forward to the kid coming home from school. Mm-hmm. This is not where we want to be. You want to greet your little girl at the door and say, I'm so happy to see you, and mean it. Mm-hmm. So we first have to get ourselves in order, and then we could move on to figuring out what's going on with our kids. And I do provide a full discipline program and a communication program so that we can really make this most important relationship we're going to have in our entire lives as rich as possible. Yeah.
I love that. And I think the parents, the people who are listening to this program, obviously love their kids, and they obviously are able to make the investment of time to sit down and read with their kids when they're young. And we advocate they continue to read to their kids as they become independent readers and through middle school and high school. And those are the parents who are going to be able to make the most use out of a book like HyperHealing, because they know that spending time with their kids is an investment in their family, investment in their kid. And I'm excited that you have this book. Tell, please, everybody where they can go to find out more about the book and also find out more about you.
Sure. So you can go to my website. That has loads of information and a lot of free downloads. That's hyperhealing.org. And you can leave a personal message there, and I'll be happy to get back to you. You can also subscribe so that you can get all sorts of information about free courses that I give sporadically throughout the year, and some free giveaways. Right now I'm having a free giveaway of a section of my book, so you can check that out on the website. You can also see me on Instagram at hyperhealing.adhd, as well as on Facebook. And I try not to go on Facebook, but your main places to find me would be Instagram and on my website. And I always am happy to hear questions, comments, and I really value the feedback of parents and professionals, because we're all always learning. Mm-hmm. And I would like to hear from you and be able to give back as well.
Awesome. We've had a really important time speaking to the author of HyperHealing, Abigail Gimpel. Hey, Abigail, thanks so very much for spending time with us.
It is my absolute pleasure. Keep doing your amazing work. It's so important to read to our kids. It's the best kind of bonding. So well done. Congratulations, and thank you for having me.
Please be sure to join us for the next episode of the Reading with Your Kids podcast. Our guest will be Chloe Goodart. She'll be here to celebrate birding for babies and also backyard birds. I want to thank the folks who made today's show so wonderful. Of course, I want to start by thanking our guest, Abigail Gimpel. Please be sure to check out HyperHealing. Also want to thank our sponsors, The Sound of Words by Anita Landau. And, of course, The Adventures of Harry and Friends by our good friend, Sarah Belisa Tucker. I want to thank my team, Fatima Khan, Rory Grady, Nicole Bell Castro, Ashley Contreras, Mirabella Q, Rain Pan. I want to thank my beautiful wife for all the support she gives me. Most of all, we all want to thank you. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us today. And as always, thank you so very much for taking the time to make the world a better place by reading with your kids. I'll be looking for you in the next edition of the Reading with Your Kids podcast.